The air shimmered with heat and incense as dawn broke over the plains of central India. From the horizon, the sandstone temples of Khajuraho rose like mirages, carved dreams frozen in stone. To the ordinary traveller, they were monuments to beauty, their walls alive with gods, dancers and celestial lovers. But to the fearful and the pious of later ages, they were something else entirely, forbidden temples whispered about in shame and wonder, monuments that dared to celebrate what others chose to hide. Long before prudence and propriety tamed the human spirit, there was a civilization that carved desire into the very face of its faith. In ancient India between the 10th and 12th centuries, artisans, poets and priests built temples not only for the gods, but for life itself, raw, sacred and unashamed. These temples were more than places of worship. They were maps of the human soul, where pleasure and prayer intertwined in ways that the modern world still struggles to understand. In a time when the divine was not distant but intimate, the sculptors of Khajuraho, Konark and Bhubaneswar filled their walls with images of love in all its forms, tender, wild, playful, transcendent. Stone figures intertwined in eternal embrace, their expressions serene, their bodies alive with movement. To the eye of devotion, it was creation itself made visible. To the eye of censorship, it was blasphemy. If you wish to uncover more stories like this, stories that reveal the hidden truths behind ancient temples, lost rituals, and forgotten civilizations, then subscribe to the channel and like this video, because what lies ahead is not merely history, it is revelation. A story that the sands of time tried to bury, but the stones refused to forget. The temples of Khajuraho were built by the Chandela dynasty, a royal line that believed pleasure was not the enemy of piety, but its expression. They ruled during a golden age when art and faith existed in harmony, when the body was seen not as sinful, but divine. To the Chandelas, creation itself was the greatest act of devotion, and the act of love was a mirror of cosmic unity. Each temple was dedicated to a deity, Shiva, Vishnu, or Devi, yet every wall spoke a universal language. The carvings did not separate the sacred from the sensual, because to them both were aspects of the same truth. The same hands that sculpted gods also sculpted lovers, and in doing so erased the line between heaven and earth. It is said that no surface in Khajuraho was left untouched. Every inch of the sandstone shimmered with life, dancers with arching backs, warriors frozen mid-battle, musicians lost in rhythm, and lovers entwined beneath the gaze of divine eyes. These carvings were not meant to provoke, but to teach, to remind the visitor that enlightenment was not found in denial, but in balance. The ancient texts of India spoke of 4 goals in life: dharma, duty; artha, wealth; kama, pleasure; and moksha, liberation. The temples celebrated all 4, for one could not reach salvation by rejecting desire, one reached it by understanding it. Pleasure, when pursued with awareness, became a form of worship. The erotic carvings were not invitations to sin, but reflections of the energy that sustains creation. Yet centuries later, when foreign eyes looked upon these temples, they saw not wisdom, but corruption. Invaders from distant lands branded them obscene, their meanings twisted, their stories silenced. The delicate artistry that once symbolized cosmic harmony became an embarrassment to those who had forgotten its truth. The temples were abandoned, their sanctity lost beneath centuries of dust and moral fear. Scholars would later call this era the spiritual eclipse, when India, once the cradle of open philosophy, began to censor its own soul. The same culture that had written the Kama Sutra, a text of philosophy, not pornography, now turned away from its teachings. Desire, once divine, became shameful. The temples of Khajuraho became haunted relics of a time when humans dared to see the divine within themselves. But to understand why these temples were built, one must look deeper into the mind of ancient India, a world where art was scripture and stone spoke in silence. The builders believed that the human body was a microcosm of the universe. Every curve, every breath, every heartbeat reflected the movement of stars and the pulse of creation. To depict desire, therefore, was not an act of lust, but an act of cosmic truth. The sculptors were not mere artisans, they were philosophers. Each figure was carved with precision and reverence. Every hand that reached, every gaze that met another, every arching spine carried layers of meaning, the unity of opposites, the merging of masculine and feminine energies, the eternal rhythm of creation and destruction. They believed that to deny desire was to deny life itself. Visitors who entered these temples would first pass through outer walls adorned with worldly scenes, battles, dances, love and laughter. But as they moved inward, the carvings became simpler, calmer, more abstract. By the time they reached the sanctum, there were no more lovers, no more movement, only the still image of the divine. The message was clear. To reach the divine, one must first pass through life, through passion, through the fire of experience. Only by embracing the world could one transcend it. Even the architecture of the temples mirrored this philosophy. The towering shikharas, the spires that rose like mountains toward the sky, symbolized the union of earth and heaven. The intricate carvings at the base represented human life, dense and complex. As the eye traveled upward, the carvings became fewer, symbolizing the ascent from desire to enlightenment. It was not shame that guided this journey, but realization. And yet, as time passed, conquerors came, dynasties fell, and faith itself fractured. The temples that once pulsed with prayer and poetry fell silent. Their meaning was lost, their art defaced, their message misunderstood. But the stones endured. Even as centuries of prudence tried to erase their purpose, they stood like sentinels, guarding the truth that life itself is sacred, in its passion, in its sorrow, and in its beauty. Centuries passed and the winds of conquest swept across India like the turning of a harsh season. The temples that once stood, bathed in sunlight, were swallowed by jungle and dust. Their carvings faded beneath rain and neglect, but their eyes, the stone eyes of lovers and gods, still watched in silence. To those who rediscovered them, they were no longer symbols of wisdom, but puzzles carved in scandal. The meaning was lost, replaced by judgment. What had once been a philosophy became a taboo. When the British colonizers arrived, they could not comprehend what they saw. Victorian eyes, steeped in repression, looked upon Khajuraho and Konark with horror. The sensual sculptures were catalogued not as art, but as indecency. The language of unity and divinity that had guided their creation was erased and replaced by the vocabulary of sin. The temples were deemed immoral, their artistry hidden from public view. Some accounts even described how officials ordered portions of carvings to be covered, for fear they might corrupt the civilized eye. And so the legacy of these sacred monuments became fragmented, lost between reverence and repression. But the stones did not forget. They carried within them a message that could not be erased by time or empire. That message was simple yet eternal, that creation in all its forms is sacred. In the heart of Khajuraho, among the temples of Kandariya Mahadeva and Lakshmana, the carvings still breathe this truth. The bodies depicted there do not tremble in lust, they flow with grace. The lovers are not human alone, but divine beings enacting the eternal rhythm of the cosmos, Tandava, the dance of Shiva and Shakti, of masculine and feminine energies intertwined. These carvings were visual hymns, their stone movements a language of enlightenment. For the people who built them, the act of love was not confined to the body, it was a doorway to the divine. In every embrace they saw the merging of opposites, earth and sky, flesh and spirit, human and God. The ancient sages taught that to know oneself was to know desire, and to know desire was to know the pulse of creation itself. The temples celebrated this understanding, not as corruption, but as the highest truth. Every carving told a story of gods descending to earth to taste the beauty they created, of men and women uniting in joy without fear or guilt. The figures of apsaras and yakshis, celestial maidens, embodied the power of attraction and abundance. Their presence was not ornamental but symbolic, representing fertility, prosperity, and the creative essence that sustained the universe. These were not scenes of indulgence, but expressions of spiritual completeness. But what makes these temples truly extraordinary is not just what they depict, but how they guide the soul. The journey from the outer wall to the innermost sanctum is an allegory, from chaos to calm, from passion to peace, from the world to the divine. The sculptors understood that to reject desire was to live in denial of life itself. They did not fear pleasure, for they believed pleasure was born of the same source as prayer. In modern times, as scholars began to decode the symbology of these temples, a new understanding emerged. The erotic scenes that once scandalized empires were found to make up less than 10% of the entire temple carvings. The rest depicted everyday life, festivals, warriors, dancers, gods, and stories of devotion. The presence of desire among these scenes was not excess, it was equilibrium. The sculptors were reminding humanity that love in all its forms is a part of existence, not apart from it. Still, the taboo lingers. Even today, many who visit these temples do so with a mix of awe and discomfort, unable to see beyond the surface. Yet those who stand quietly before the carvings, listening to what the stone whispers through the centuries, begin to understand. They see that the temples of Khajuraho were not built to shock, they were built to awaken. To awaken the understanding that life's beauty is not something to be feared or hidden, but embraced. That desire is not the opposite of purity, but its reflection. The ancients knew that suppression breeds suffering, but awareness brings liberation. The very act of carving these forms into stone was a declaration that no part of the human experience was unworthy of the divine. There is a story that when the Chandelas began building these temples, a sage warned them that desire would corrupt the people. The king replied, "Only those who see sin in creation will find corruption in art." And so the temples rose, shimmering testaments to a civilization unashamed of its humanity. Over 1,000 years later, the stones still speak. Tourists walk beneath their shadows, cameras flashing, voices hushed. Few realize they're walking through the pages of a forgotten scripture, one not written in words but in flesh and spirit, carved into eternity. The gods still dance upon the walls, the lovers still hold each other in silent defiance of time, and the temple still hums with the energy of life, bold, sacred, unapologetic. The modern world, with its contradictions and confusions, continues to struggle with the balance these temples mastered long ago. We divide the sacred from the sensual, the spiritual from the physical, but in the heart of Khajuraho, that divide does not exist. There, the body and the soul are not enemies, they are partners in the divine play of existence. As the sun sets over the spires of Khajuraho, the carvings glow gold and crimson. Shadows dance across the figures, and for a fleeting moment, it feels as if the ancient sculptors are still at work, shaping not stone but the memory. These temples stand not as relics of a forgotten past, but as reminders of what humanity once dared to believe. That enlightenment is not found in denial, but in the full acceptance of life's beauty. The forbidden temples were never truly forbidden, they were misunderstood. Their message was never one of sin, but of unity. And perhaps in their quiet defiance of time, they still wait, not to be worshipped, but to be understood. If this story opened your eyes to the lost wisdom of ancient India, then subscribe to the channel and like this video. Because history is not only about empires and wars, it is also about the forgotten truths carved into stone. Truths that once taught us how to live, how to love, and how to see the divine in ourselves.